The meeting was called without explanation, which already told me everything. It was not the kind of gathering where decisions were discussed. It was the kind where conclusions were announced. When I entered, the executives avoided eye contact, and the family members sat together as if a verdict had already been signed. The CEO's daughter-in-law waited for the door to close before rising from her seat with a level of confidence that made everyone else smaller. She placed a thick folder on the table and pushed it toward me as if presenting evidence in a courtroom. She declared that I had been spending company money on imaginary training programs and claimed that the records in her folder proved it. Her tone carried no uncertainty. She lingered on the accusation as if she had practiced it in front of a mirror. The room tightened around her performance. Several people shifted in their chairs, already distancing themselves from whatever they believed was coming. She announced that my employment was over and spoke as if the matter required no discussion. Not a single person asked for clarification. No one requested context. The moment belonged entirely to her, and she believed she had delivered a decisive blow. I remained seated, listening to every word without offering a single objection. I watched her expectation grow, waiting for outrage or denial. None came. Instead, I smiled. That reaction unsettled her more than any argument would have. Experience teaches you that loud accusations often hide quiet ignorance. The people who shout first rarely understand who truly controls the foundation beneath their own feet. After the accusation settled, I realized how little they understood about the work they dismissed so easily. They repeated the word training as if it described a series of superficial sessions that added no real value. In their minds, it meant presentations, rented rooms, and consultants who left behind glossy handouts. They never imagined that the quiet work behind those invoices supported the entire stability of the company they claimed to protect. For 3 years, I had been rebuilding the internal structure piece by piece. The servers that once failed without warning were moved to a resilient system that could survive power loss and unexpected outages. Security protocols were redesigned to block intrusions that had gone unnoticed for years. Licensing agreements were consolidated and registered with the accuracy of a legal archive. Nothing about this work was dramatic. It did not produce applause or graphs. It produced reliability. Each request was documented. Each invoice passed through the hands of the same executives who now pretended to discover them for the first time. They approved everything because they never cared to read the details. They were comfortable as long as the lights stayed on and the clients received uninterrupted service. Not once did they ask why failures disappeared. Not once did they ask how outdated systems suddenly adapted to modern demands. They were satisfied with the illusion of order, unaware that real order requires constant care. The quiet truth is simple. When operations run smoothly, no one investigates the hands holding the structure in place. They only notice those hands when they want someone to blame. By then, the responsibility they ignored has already shifted to someone prepared to carry it. What struck me most was how confidently they spoke about ownership without ever studying the structure they claimed to control. They assumed that paying for a system meant possessing it. They did not understand that possession requires attention, signatures, and legal awareness. Throughout the years, they approved expenses with a casual gesture, believing their authority made the details unnecessary. They trusted their titles more than their understanding, and that created a space wide enough for truth to move freely. The deployment clauses were available to anyone who cared to read them. They explained the limits of access, the registration rights, and the obligations tied to maintenance. No one asked a single question. They signed each release without examining the long-term consequences. When the servers were transferred, they celebrated the improved performance and never wondered whose credentials executed the change. When the intellectual property portfolio was updated, they congratulated the team and never checked the registry. Every contract for redundancy was filed with clear contact names, clear renewal terms, and clear ownership lines. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was disguised. I followed company procedures and documented each step with the discipline that comes naturally when experience has taught you that clarity is protection. Reaching 50 teaches a person something younger colleagues often overlook. Preparation is not dramatic. It is steady. It is patient. It anticipates moments others believe will never arrive. While they trusted assumptions, I trusted documentation. While they moved through decisions with haste, I moved through them with intention. Exits are not created in moments of crisis. They are built quietly, long before anyone senses the ground shifting. By the time they noticed, the structure they ignored had already chosen its rightful owner. HR called me into a smaller conference room that afternoon, the kind of room used when decisions are already final. The representative entered with a clipboard, followed by an assistant who carried a sealed envelope with a seriousness that did not match its contents. Their expressions revealed more discomfort than conviction. It was clear they had practiced the script in advance, rehearsing each line to avoid hesitation. They sat across from me and began reading the decision as if reciting a procedure they barely understood. They presented the termination letter with a steady hand, expecting resistance or outrage. When none appeared, they moved quickly to the next requirement. They asked for every form of access associated with my position.
Keys, badge,
Server authentication token, administrative credentials. The assistant placed a small tray on the table to collect each item, as if organizing evidence. I placed everything inside with slow, deliberate movements that made both of them uneasy. They waited for a reaction. They wanted a protest they could report. They wanted a scene that would confirm the story they had been told. I offered none. My voice remained steady. My posture remained relaxed. The silence stretched until they no longer knew where to look. Calmness unsettles people who expect chaos. It reminds them that their version of events may not be complete. The assistant closed the tray and escorted me to the exit with a stiffness that suggested she feared I might change suddenly. I walked out without the weight of loss or uncertainty. I did not need to defend anything. My work had already spoken. The systems they relied on were still running, and they had not yet discovered what their signatures had placed in my hands. The first signs appeared only a few hours after I walked out of the building. Employees noticed that routine tasks required more time than usual. Pages that once opened instantly began to circle in silence before loading. At first, they blamed the weather, then the network, then the staff. No one considered the deeper structure that supported their entire workflow. By late afternoon, delays turned into interruptions. Programs refused to start. Databases stalled during simple searches. The quiet hum of productivity dissolved into confusion. As the evening approached, the licenses that validated their core operations reached the end of their authorized cycle. Renewal notices had been sent long before, but they were linked to my credentials and my authorization chain. Without my approval, the system could not extend itself. Servers that once synchronized with ease began to redirect to holding nodes that required verification. Clients attempting to access their platforms were met with blank screens and error messages they had never seen before. None of this was an act of retaliation. It was the natural consequence of ownership structures they never bothered to study. Every component had been registered with precise care. Every vendor contract held my name as the primary technical authority. When the company called for assistance, the vendors checked their files and routed the questions to the registries. The registries responded with the same answer. The architecture belonged to the person who designed it, filed it, maintained it, and protected it. Each inquiry returned to a single point of accountability. Their entire digital foundation was tied to one signature they had dismissed without thought. What they experienced was not a collapse. It was a reminder that structure rewards attention and punishes assumption. The calls began before sunrise. Executives reached out to the legal department with increasing urgency as they attempted to understand why their access remained frozen. At first, the attorneys believed it was a routine administrative delay, the kind that usually resolved itself once a missing signature appeared. That confidence faded when they opened the ownership files. The servers that powered the entire business were registered under my technical corporation. The intellectual property they relied on for licensing agreements carried my authorization codes. Even the data backbone they had quietly praised during board meetings listed my entity as the primary custodian. Panic replaced certainty. The attorneys tried to trace alternative routes and found none. Every system they examined led back to the same registrations. Every renewal request required my approval. When they turned their attention to the physical space, the situation became even more unsettling. The building that housed the executive suites was part of a long-term lease established during the restructuring phase. They had signed the documents without reviewing the ownership section, convinced that the arrangement was temporary. They never realized the lease originated from the same infrastructure entity that managed the technological framework. By the time morning arrived, property management had already acted. The legal team arrived on the executive floor to find a notice taped to the glass door. It was simple, direct, and final. Operations in that section of the building were no longer authorized, and transition would begin immediately. The new tenants had completed their agreement the previous evening and were prepared to move in without delay. The silence that followed was not confusion. It was recognition. They had underestimated the very structure that kept them standing. The days that followed carried an unusual stillness. The board launched an internal review, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. They questioned department heads, examined contracts, and attempted to reconstruct a timeline that made sense. Each report returned with missing sections. No one could explain how so many responsibilities had drifted into a single structure without their awareness. The more they investigated, the more they realized the oversight belonged entirely to them. Quiet resignations began to appear. Senior managers who once spoke with authority left discreetly, offering vague reasons about personal decisions or new opportunities. Their departures were not publicized. The company preferred silence to discussion. In the hallways, employees walked carefully, as if sound itself might expose something unwelcome. Conversations faded when doors opened. People sensed that the foundation beneath them was less stable than they imagined. The board did not issue a statement. The directors avoided addressing the situation directly, fearing that clarity would invite further questions. Their silence created a vacuum where speculation grew. Some believed the company would recover once new systems were installed. Others sensed that the damage was deeper than missing licenses or inaccessible servers. A structure built on assumption rarely survives its first real test. No apology arrived. The leadership could not face the contradiction of their decisions. Instead, they attempted to continue operations as if the disruption were temporary. Yet the truth revealed itself in smaller ways. Departments delayed projects. Clients reconsidered commitments. Revenues shifted downward in monthly summaries. Companies rarely fall in dramatic moments. They diminish in meeting notes, postpone deadlines, and cautious tones. The collapse begins quietly, long before anyone is willing to name it. If you have crossed 50, you carry something that many workplaces misunderstand. You have lived through cycles, crises, reinventions, and forgotten promises. You understand that real stability comes from patience, not performance. You recognize that the loudest person in the room is rarely the one holding the structure together. Experience rarely announces itself. It simply builds, protects, and anticipates what others fail to consider. Silence is often misread. People assume a quiet professional has nothing to add, when in truth that person has already evaluated the situation from every angle. Remaining calm is not a lack of strength. It is the presence of discipline. With age comes the ability to let noise pass without interruption. This is not retreat. This is strategy. Many believe that authority comes from title or budget. They forget that true influence comes from understanding how systems actually function. Ownership is not created by approval. Ownership is created by knowledge, consistency, and documentation. These are qualities that strengthen with years, not fade with them. If you feel underestimated, remember that preparation is not dramatic. It is steady. Every careful decision becomes part of a foundation that cannot be shaken by sudden accusations or careless assumptions. People who dismiss experience reveal more about themselves than about you. They expose their dependence on illusions they never evaluated. The truth is simple. Many organizations survive because of the quiet work done by people who have lived long enough to value structure over applause. When those individuals are pushed aside, the consequences appear slowly, then all at once. People who remove experience often learn too late that it was the only element keeping their world aligned.